So is neurodiversity a strange intelligence? And what is it like to be neurodiverse in a world where neuronormal is how we kind of assign roles or kind of create life or engage with life as we know it? These are some of the questions that we want to explore today with Becca Campbell, who is a neurodiverse mum looking after a neurodiverse child, doing coaching in the neurodiverse world, and also is an awesome person who has a very unique, hilarious and fun way of seeing the universe. So welcome, Becca, and thank you for being part of Undisciplined, our very left of centre, but not politically podcast. How are you today?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me on, Maggie. This is an exciting opportunity to just share more of my normal life and just like what we consider something that other people might consider a little bit more on the margins, but this is just us on a day-to-day level.
So you're calling us today from Seattle, Seattle regions, and say a little bit about yourself, Becca, and then we can talk a little bit about how we met.
Great. So I am a ADHD/autistic mom. I have also married somebody who is ADHD and autistic, and then we made a ADHD autistic kiddo. So I am deeply entrenched in the world of neurodiversity. And on top of that, there are many things that we enjoy about our life that is a little bit different or creative or just outside the realm of what people consider mainstream or normal, that allows me to have a different perspective about how our brains work and what we do with those differently working brains.
Mm. And Becca, you also work as a coach or supporter, mentor for people who are bringing up young people who have neurodiversity in some form. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had started coaching ADHD individuals, and what I found myself realizing is that actually too late in the process, when someone's older, an adult, kind of already having lived some of their life, they were struggling with ideas about how they could just function in the world. And I realized actually it's parents of children who are neurodiverse that might have a better understanding or might have a better idea about flexing for their kids so that they can grow up into those adults with a little bit more accommodation or just understanding about what to do with their very fascinating brains.
Mm. So tell me a little bit about, I guess, daily life and some of the ways that you encounter or manage or work with the environment that you're in. Like, tell me about you and how that works as a strange intelligence. Strange not being a judgment, by the way, more being a fabulous other way of seeing the world.
So I kind of want to tell a little bit of a story because this is probably the beginning stage of me noticing some of the more fun parts of being having a neurodiverse brain. So we had a 4-year-old kid at the time. He's older now. And he came to us and I said, "Hey, what do you want to do for your birthday?" And he said, "Could we turn our house into a natural history museum?" And my first thought, as just like somebody with not a lot of time, was like, oh my God. And then the thought right after that was, actually, we totally could do that. And that would be a really fun activity for our family. And as we started kind of thinking about what to do, like what it would look like, I just thought, well, we definitely have to share this with people. We can't just make this huge like project and not share it. So then we started asking our kiddo, like, do you have ideas? Like, what does a natural history museum mean? We had been to a couple by this point, so he had an idea. And instead of just being like, sure, we'll have people come into a one-room scenario with his just ideas of what prehistoric animals were like, we took it off into the deep end. And in that moment that we decided to do it, it was not just because of his brain and what he wanted to do, but it was actually healing and exciting for our adult brains. We were already deep into the world of being creative and doing things differently. But to have our own child come and ask us to do something like that, we were like, ooh, this isn't even by us. Like, we're not forcing him to do it. He's asking us to do it. And I think that was just like the beginning of us understanding, like, oh, we're in this world together, all three of us. And navigating it is not just helping him with school or helping him with like limitations or challenges. It's like you have this deep desire to express your love of a thing in this very dramatic and intense way. And so do we. So like, let's just see what we can do together as a family. And that, it seems like it's out of the ordinary for a lot of people, but for us, it was just like, we love to express ourselves creatively. So this was a normal way to do that for all of us. And that's kind of how we, ever since that moment, we just keep thinking like, if we are capable of that, we're also capable of this easier thing, smaller thing, less impactful thing. So that's kind of like where our brains are coming from. I just want to give you that first picture. In terms of our day-to-day, it started probably even before that for myself, of just thinking, I know I'm thinking about things differently than people. I know that what I see and what other people see is just different. And I early on didn't have any judgment on that. It wasn't like it was bad. It just, I was totally interested in why it was so different. And I knew I was gifted, which is a neurodiverse term now. At the time, it just meant smart, or that's how people were telling it to me. But over time, I was like, well, if I'm so smart, why are my grades so bad? So I stopped thinking of it as smart and just thinking about it as like, I think things differently. I don't necessarily come at every angle the way that I'm told to. And in fact, if you tell me to come at it with a certain perspective, I will absolutely not do that, which is another part of the way my brain works. If you tell me what to do, I definitely won't do it. And so the day-to-day ended up being, how could I make this mine? How could I make this assignment mine? How could I make this work mine? How could I write this differently so that it's my voice? And that's kind of what basically shows up throughout my interaction with anybody, is that what's authentically mine? And so, yeah, that's my day-to-day. It's just like, hey, is this what I think? Is this what I want to say? Is this the harder, more authentic thing? And I guess that's part of how all my stuff comes out. It's like, hey, do I really think this, or this is just a voice I've heard in the society? So
I guess one of the things to say before we continue is that neurodiversity as a label, for want of a better word, is kind of embraces a number of different things, doesn't it? So it's not like, hey, I have a neurodiverse way of seeing the world. That could mean anything on a continuum in one way, or any group of different characteristics on another. So we're talking to you not as a representative, but as an example, or a person who has one unique point of view within that term or wider point of view, right? And I guess also there's a privilege of being from a certain background and being able to manage or maneuver in that world that isn't present for other people who maybe come from different other socioeconomic backgrounds, right? Where they're having to be much more survive the school system in a way that I guess everyone does if they're coming from a different perspective, but much more so if they're from a different ethnic group, or et cetera, it becomes more difficult. So I just want to say that because it's easy to kind of, we're representing neurodiversity, but we're not. We're kind of having a conversation with Becca, who has her own unique experience in that. And Becca, you and I met in a really interesting context, right? So which is its own kind of interesting worldview. If we're talking about strange intelligences, I guess we could say spiritual or cultural intelligence.
Right.
Because we met at Findhorn Foundation when you were there as what would we call it? Not exchange students. It was like a program,
like an abroad
for
program?
liberal arts students to come to Findhorn and experience
right.
that. And for those who don't know, Findhorn it's now closed, was a spiritual retreat centre / commune, relatively famous in its own New Age world. And I had lived there for a number of years and was the Findhorn education representative at the time. And I was hosting college students from the US to come over and experience Findhorn. Why they honestly put me in that role, I have no idea. I was probably the worst person. I hadn't even gone through the Findhorn Experience Week, which is like the induction program. I wasn't a member of Findhorn. I was a member of the community, kind of a wise ass and not really a belonger. But I was doing the role and it came with the role. So here I am inducting you, poor Becca, who's imagining me. I should really have been like embracing you into the fold of the mother house, and it was just dark and cynical. And the whole time I was there feeling like a terrible fraud. But we met and I spent most of our time laughing together. And then I guess something about our sense of humor connected, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you today, because I think about strange intelligences. It's not just about things like neurodiversity or different ways we come from different cultures. It's also ways of seeing the world and being able to laugh at the situation you're in, which means that you're not subject to it. It means that you've got an eye on the situation you're in, right?
Right. Well, I think that it's fascinating that you describe it that way. I was so kind of you not to mention that I was an old student. So I was 25 when I was a student in college. And I'll just kind of wink to my neurodivergence about that as well. But the idea of doing things with a sense of humor absolutely is part of my strange intelligence for sure. And I just want to go back before I continue on the Findhorn thing, just to talk about the privilege a little bit more. Not only do I have privilege in the way of I had time and energy to dissect how I think, right? A lot of people don't have that, especially in real time. But I came from a family that was neurodivergent and neurodiverse in their like demonstration of living in the world. So I didn't even have any stigma inside of my own family life, which is totally uncommon. I found that it's very common for different family members to have ideas about what this means, and you should, try to instruct your behavior out away from your neurodivergence so that you can get along with everybody. That's, a summed up version of that. So I do want to highlight that as well, that is my experience, that I have a whole family full of people similar to me, or at least quirky enough that I didn't notice anything was weird or strange. But going back to the Findhorn thing, I think part of my perspective taking, which goes along with how my brain works, is just like, I find it fascinating to like take on the perspective of other people. It's like an advanced form of empathy where I'm actually going through like feeling what trying to feel what that person is feeling and then having these experiences. But the shadow aspect of life is absolutely pushed out to the margins, and it's not comfortable for most people. But I found that, especially with you as a, bit of a cohort partner, that it made it easier to just say like, this is weird, right? Are we all looking at the same weird thing? Or like, this is against what we've been taught. We all agree that, right? Agree with that. So I do feel like part of what was exceptionally fun and amusing was that we were poking fun at a serious community idea, but we were also a part of the community poking fun, right? Like we were kicked out because we had a shadow aspect or because things were, hilarious to us or just comical in general. So I really valued that in meeting you and then in spending that time in community examining interesting things close up.
Mm. And you were talking about families, Becca. What are some of the things that people come to you with issues about? So you're obviously doing some coaching with mums, probably mainly, because I think you told me before. And so what are the things that they ask or want to know?
I think a lot of moms and parents is a team struggle with what the outcome is going to be if they accommodate their child. And accommodations range from everything school related to then job related to then just life related. And the most common thing I hear is if I don't teach slash train my kid into behaving in a certain way and expecting this certain type of thing, they will end up being a failure. Which is like, even now, my heart kind of breaks a little bit because I'm like, a failure just because they're not complying with a social norm? Gosh, that is intense. And to have that expectation of your child to perform in that way was really, I started to have the empathy for I was more advocating for the kids at this point. So that's one of the top things that people come to me for. And another type of thing is just mindset changing. So many parents and, moms in general have a behavior that they have internalized as acceptable. And so what they want their kids to do is behave acceptably. And it's totally amazing these days. We can be a huge range of ourselves. And what's acceptable is I mean, it's huge. It's no longer the 1950s, early 60s, like everybody acts the same and that's how get along you'll go along to get along. Actually get along to go along, right? There's my brain flipping it. But I think what most of the time people are just grappling with is, can we actually be different and still live a good and fulfilling life? And I'm resounding yes, right? Like, let's just answer that question right now. You can live differently and still have a successful, happy, meaningful life, especially if you are in a community of other people also doing the same. I think that ends up being one of the side benefits is people usually feel isolated, but they don't know. And especially moms, like who get the burden of raising children, the loneliness factor and the isolation factor feels insurmountable. And I just like to come in there and say, like, it's not insurmountable and it doesn't need to be epic. It doesn't need to be this, like you have, 10 best friends who all understand everything that you and your child or your children are going through. That's that bar is too high. But when it's just like one or two people who are like, yeah, I've been where you are, here's what's changed. Most people just start to, change their ideas because they're inside of another container of people who are doing things differently and it's not so scary out on your own. Those are probably the top things that either I notice or people come to me to talk about.
Mm. And Becca, you're also a creative practitioner. I know you have a range of different things that you've done, but one of the things we've spoken about is your writing practice. And you have a really interesting letter writing practice. Do you want to say a little bit about that? Because I guess that fits into this world about kind of the different way of seeing the world and how you interact with it in terms of creativity, I guess.
I would love to talk about that. One of the things that I started doing as a kid was just writing letters to, friends and family. And as I got older, the letters started to be better than a journal entry because I was explaining something to somebody. So I was really breaking it down in my brain to share with somebody else. And over time, I actually started to write letters to my apartment or to I had a back injury and I wrote letters to my back injury. Like, what are you trying to tell me? And that was a way for my brain and sometimes even my heart to connect with itself without my judgment piping in. So I would name what I was writing to, and then sometimes I would name what I was responding to. One of my recent practices is to write to the writer inside me. So the letter is between the writer inside me and then the emerging self. So I say, dear writer, and then I respond, dear emergence. And bizarrely, I come up with answers that I can't come up with on my own unless I hear that internalized voice of a higher being or something responding outside of my judgment. but letter writing in general has been a really important connective practice. And again, I don't see it around in the world, but it made sense to me. It made sense to have these conversations because, as many neurodiverse people will tell you, there's lots of talking going on up here. I just don't give myself the time to write it down. But once I started to do that, it became more clear, like, oh, that's right, I'm struggling here. Or this is the specific thing I want to hear myself say, that it doesn't make sense to just try to exclaim it or declare it out to nobody. So letter writing has been a fun and creative way for me to slow down the ticker tape of my brain and like pick things up one at a time, hold it in my hand, and be like, what does this mean? And put it back down after I get some sort of response. So that's a lot of questions and a lot of answers, and just allows me to be very fluid with my thought process.
Do you write letters online as well, or just on paper, like in the physical world per se?
Well, the practice where I write to myself back and forth, that's online. It's not public, but yeah, it's not handwritten. I think, the difference between that is sometimes when our brain is saying something and it has to travel to like our hand, it has a different weight or a different intensity around it. So I do that physically as a practice, but sometimes my brain is moving at such a clip that I can only type it, and I can only kind of do it without thinking about the outcome. I have thought about publishing some of the things that I do, but sometimes it is literally like looking at somebody's basement full of junk. And I don't necessarily think everybody wants to look at that. But sometimes, yeah, the day is like, I had an interesting day. This thought kept coming up. I don't know what it means. And then I kind of respond back to like, well, what do you think it means? Is it this or this or this? And I just wait for the one thing to like kind of resonate. But I don't know how much online for the public view it makes sense to share.
Nobody wants to delve in your dark drawers, and that means so many things out loud.
I don't know, maybe they do. I'm like, ooh.
Do you support others to have a writing practice in that way, Becca, or have you done that?
Yeah, I just taught. So I'll give you a little bit more about how my brain works with the community. There was a group of people that we call multipotentialites. And speaking of crazy brains, it's not just neurodiverse, it is diverse in all categories. So we just got together a couple weeks ago and met up, and I taught about writing using that tool, like writing to yourself or aspects of the world that you just need to grapple with. And several people who were already letter writers even were like, oh, I never thought of it like that. And in the moment, writing to your arm, if your arm hurts, or writing to, your dream life, or writing to something that doesn't normally get that audience feels a little, I don't know, strange. And at the same time, I realize there's so many aspects of ourselves that we don't communicate with, that it just opens the doors wide. And so teaching that as a tool to people is really important to me, especially people who compartmentalize, right? That's very common, especially if you are surviving your neurodiversity versus thriving in it, is the idea of like, well, if I shut this part down and just act normal at work, then I'll be fine for however long. And I just found that actually it's a really great tool to be able to stop doing the compartmentalizing, but also to have an engaged interaction with parts of ourselves that we're like, we don't know what to do with this. So I absolutely want it to be a tool, and I want it to be something that people can use as a quick thing. It doesn't, you don't need to go into like a long drawn out 1800s, saga back and forth with yourself, but you can just be like, dear money problems, what's up? How's it going? Why is this elusive? And sometimes it can also just be kind of funny, because there are parts of myself that are, and this too, that the shadow wants to say some stuff like, hey, cut that out or knock that off. And we think it's supposed to be all high and meditative and as if there's some person who's got ample amounts of wisdom. And then there's just sometimes where it's some straight talking, which my body likes to 2x4 me. And I'm like, you know what? I don't need the 2x4. You don't have to harm me just to get your point across. You could actually try to do it ahead of time without the harm. So yeah, absolutely a tool to teach other people. And I have found that people enjoy listening to their other parts of their brain.
Mm. And what do you think? Do you think today's climate, Becca, is better? Like we first met, I think, 2005.
3.
Yeah, something like that, or earlier, 3, yeah. Mm-hmm. 20 years ago. Oh my gosh. Do you think today, 20 years later, that the climate for multipotentialites, neurodiverse individuals of different kinds, etc., is more welcoming, or in terms or more embracing or inclusive? I don't know the best word for it. All of those sound so bad, but you know what I mean. What's your sense about that?
I think that using online tools has really helped a good chunk of those people. I tell people all the time that I'd prefer to message them asynchronously so that I don't have to do it in a certain time, and with like a video instead of with just a phone call. And back in 2003, we didn't have any of those tools. I mean, I think I had my first cell phone 5 years before that. So the tools just didn't catch up with the brains that are using them. And so absolutely it's way better. And I think the transfer of information is faster. So when I found out that my kid had pathological demand avoidance, it was through a Facebook group. It was not a doctor. It was not a diagnostic thing. I had to say a bunch, I was just typing to somebody or just typing to the group that my kid had meltdowns. And I probably gave some details about what that meant. And somebody said, check out pathological demand avoidance. Now, that sounds incredibly overwhelming when you're just looking at a book or, a diagnostic tool. But as I read about it on specific research heavy websites, I just thought, oh my God, thank goodness that I was online, that somebody said that to me, and that I have a brain that's plastic enough that I can change my mind, right? That it wasn't just, he should grow up like I grew up. And without that, I don't know where we'd be. And it was just an offhanded comment. I mean, I don't even remember who said it. And now I want to be that person for everybody else in groups too. Like, hey, the behaviors you're saying sound a lot like this. Check out this website just to make sure it's not this, if it's not. And if it is this, there's a whole other world that you're going to start to see show up. And I also think that more people in public are offering the inside track. It used to be really stigmatized to have ADHD. I remember the ADHD kids in my school. We didn't name them anything because we didn't know what it was called, but absolutely that kid was going to a special pull-out class for his problems / issues, rather than he's just he needs more time to be physical or something like that, or he just needs different help. And now when we say ADHD, I would say, at least when I'm talking to people, half the people are like, oh yeah, they either know what I'm talking about, they have somebody in their life that's like me, or they've read about it in a more famous person. And that really, really helps, because the more people that say that they experience their lives differently, the more people are like, oh, the world can be experienced differently. And then that allows more people to chime in and say, actually, this is what I'm really good at. This is what I'm challenged by. And to get, again, accommodations, or just to get compassion and understanding, or to even be used better, right? A lot of people, when they have those strange brains, don't know how to say to people, the best use of this strange brain is, data entry, because I hold on to details really easily, or creative brainstorming because there's no bounds in my brain about what's possible. I just kind of spew out all the stuff that I see visually. And I'm so grateful to be alive at this time. And I'm grateful that my kid is younger than me, so he didn't have to go through the first 30 years not having that information. Because in his world, it's completely different than mine, even though we share DNA. He does not have the same experience of workarounds or not being accommodated or anything like that. We're absolutely able to cater quickly to how his brain works. So yeah, I hope it just gets better from here.
Mm. Are there any other things, Becca, that you think are important for people to understand or hear in relation to this?
You know, to me, this sounds academic, right? It sounds like we're slotting into these like charts and like, you know, figuring how, you know, how populations work. And I think something that gets forgotten or just gets sidelined is it's fascinating to see how brains are so different. And when I tell people exactly how my brain works in all its craziness, and I'll go into that in a second, most people are like, what? And I'm like, I know. I'm privileged to have an idea of how to describe what it is, right? I understand that I kind of play in both worlds a little bit. I can describe a neurodivergent brain to a neurotypical brain. I've had to do that, so it's just easy to adapt. But once you kind of show what it looks like, it takes away the othering or the categorizing. So for instance, if you were to look at Leonardo da Vinci, which everyone compares everyone else to, right? Like that guy was super brilliant and here's why, it's because he thought all these things. If you were to go and talk to another neurodiverse group of people, and you'd said like, oh, hey, this is what was going on, we would all just nod and be like, yeah, that makes sense. It's not out of the ordinary for us to have our, you know, brains just go in all these directions. And I think to make somebody better because they have gotten a platform to share, right? He had a lot of notebooks. They're all on display now, art museums, all that kind of stuff. Cool. But if you were to track me, I would have the same type of notebooks, a little bit messier and, you know, not written backwards, but my brain works very similarly in that way. And so you're missing people would be missing a lot of brilliant people without kind of just investigating that more. So I tell people that my brain, this is specifically how my brain works, right? I see the words in my brain spelled out and it's like a ticker tape. So I'm reading off a prompt in my brain, which doesn't make any sense to me, just how it happens. And then on top of that, if you were to, I'm trying to think of like there's all these movies that have holograms and they're finally capturing the way in 3D, like how those of us like this think. But if you were to hologram my brain, it would be spherical and it would be like a multi-dimension, can't think of the exact thing, but there's a mind map kind of thing. So mind map is 2D, but mine would be 3D. So it would just be like moving in time. And then when you touch one of the points, it spiders out into like all these other points. Now, I'm not in control of that every single moment, which is what impulsivity looks like. Means I'll follow the thing without knowing where it's going. And then I might say some stuff out loud and people will think it's a non sequitur. But I'll tell you exactly in this little crazy map where it lives, right? On top of that, because I'm a pattern seeker, I am constantly taking in information in the same way. So not only is my output like that, my input is like that. So at any moment, a sound, a smell, something I'm looking at, colors, music, that will all come in and plug into this constantly moving constellation. To manage that type of thing takes all of my energy, and sometimes I can't. So those are the days when many folks in the neurodiverse community will say, have no more spoons. It's just, I can't possibly grab all the things and put them in the right order or say the right thing at the right time. And it'll be like this will be my day. It's just me trying to manage all those things in space and time. I have no problem with it, that movement and that constant whatever, as long as I know how to take my downtime and take my, rest when I need it. But it's absolutely important that I don't have another outside thing coming in and saying, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. Right. Mm. And I think that is the difference between recognizing your kids are doing that with or without their own consent to it. Right. Like my kid once told me that, I said, what's it like in your brain? And he said, it's like a constant fireworks show. Mm. And it really helped me visualize and then think about the input that is overwhelming in a fireworks show. So there's that boom, there's the color, there's the different designs that you're paying attention to, right? That's just fireworks. But when he said that, I was like, oh, that must be overwhelming and loud and noisy. And he said, yeah, and it's constant. And I just thought, oh, if I were trying to quiet him down or like make him respond these compliant ways, how hard would he have to work to make something that's naturally occurring stop, right? Mm. It would take all of his energy. And so at the end of the day, he would be melting down because he has been, basically fighting with versions of himself. And I just don't think a lot of people see that when they're talking to people with ADHD. They think it's a busyness. They think it's like lack of focus or laziness, that they're not doing something. And I'm just like, if you think about exactly what's going on in each individual's brain, and they're all different and they all have different hosts and they all have different origins and acceptabilities. If you're thinking about how people are managing that, I think people will be a lot more compassionate if somebody forgot an appointment, right? I mean, an appointment is just one thing in my constantly moving sphere that I'm putting in space and time. So when I forget that, it's not because I'm disrespectful or because I'm lazy. It's just because I hear all that stuff going on. And I just think that's really important because inside of all that is brilliance. And there's so many aspects of creativity and just a different way of looking at stuff that are valuable in our culture. And I just think it's amazing that we have that. And we should absolutely capitalize on that a lot more than we do. And I hope that over time, my kiddos' generation will just normalize it, meaning like, yeah, we have a neurodiverse team, period. Not we have accommodations for the people who need accommodations, who have limits in the work environment. If you put me in the right place using my strengths, I don't need the limits, right? Like I will do the thing I can do naturally if you put me in on the team with that in mind. So yeah, I have that hope, and I have the happy experience of being in the generations that's watching that change. So yeah, I want more people to think about it as a benefit and not as something they have to handle.
And if people are interested in contacting you for your writing workshops or for coaching and mentoring in this area, what is the best way to do that?
So my website is yourvisioncoach.com. And if you connect with me through that, I can let all of the stuff out, all the butterflies out of the box. And even though the website's pretty minimal.
The box today, yeah. But it's a black box, Becca, a deep box with many things inside it. We've covered some of those today.
Yeah, some of those butterflies are definitely mechanical robots, but absolutely. But yeah, I would love to reach out, even if it's just a chat about like, hey, what more I can share. I know a lot of resources that I think would help people just in the beginning stages. So absolutely reach out to me there.
Cool. Thank you, Becca.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.